My guest today is Walt Bismarck. He is a prolific Substack author, a writer, someone who is a figure from the former alt-right, and this time we discuss what happened with that movement, what went wrong, what went right, and what we can learn for whatever dissident politics one might be interested in participating in nowadays. We also talk about millennials, about Zoomers, about boomers, about what the relationships should be between these warring factions in the culture wars, in the generational wars. We also talk about issues around sexuality and being traumatized by modernity for both sexes. We also go into Me Too, agency, power, all sorts of interesting tangents, a bit of Romanian history at the end there. So if you are interested in hearing the extended version of this conversation, please go to alexkashuta.com or to Patreon if you just like to listen to the podcast and not interested in the extended archive, bonus episodes, community, all this type of stuff, which you should be interested in because Substack is where a lot of these conversations happen nowadays. And I definitely recommend it that you check out Walt's Substack and Reagan's Substack. That's also recommended here in this episode. So I think, I think it's a good thing to, to go to, even if you don't subscribe to my Substack. I think it's a very generative space now. I hope you enjoy this conversation. So I've gotten this as a question from my audience to make a sort of intro presentation, explanation of the alt-right, because a lot of them are part of the new right or dissident right, and it's sometimes hard to understand kind of the genealogy, what's different, who are the characters, what happened, why did it implode, and also why did a character like you decide to reemerge from the ashes of the alt-right to impart wisdom to this new generation of people?
Yeah, no, all great questions. So I would say that the rank and file of the alt-right circa 2015 to 2017, they're mostly, core to late millennials, right? People born, between 85 and 95. People who had grown up, in the aftermath of 9/11, being very sort of activated by the Iraq War. They were, very much against foreign intervention. A lot of them got involved in the Ron Paul movement after getting involved in new atheism and, striking back very fiercely against the sort of George W. Bush evangelical instinct. A lot of them then sort of turned to identitarianism after Ron Paul's loss in 2012, which was, of course, like you have these Zionists who were calling him anti-Semitic because he was he didn't even oppose Israel. He was just kind of more tepid in his support of Israel. So, they all called Ron Paul a neo-Nazi for that. That, of course, made a lot of people legitimately quite anti-Semitic. Meanwhile, you had just racial issues just rapidly increasing in salience. And there were a few aspects of this. There was, in the aftermath of Romney's loss in 2012, everyone was attributing it to racial factors, saying that, Hispanics were just so rapidly increasing in their proportion of the population that Republicans would never be able to win a national election again because, Hispanics, were, especially in the Obama years, voting very heavily Democratic. So there was this idea that, the country was changing. Demographics are destiny, right? That was a phrase that was bandied a lot, quite a bit. And that's what made me become a white nationalist. It wasn't because I was really dedicated to the Republican Party or that I really cared about. I mean, I was kind of a libertarian. I was kind of into all this weird stuff. It was more the fact that, they would always talk about America's demographic change in a very sort of humiliating way, in a way that I don't think anyone who just has balls, anyone who just has a basic kind of dignity as a human being would tolerate. I remember on Colbert's show, he would read a headline Americans are going to white Americans are going to be a minority by 20 whatever, right? And then the audience full of blue hairs and fat Mexican women, they always start clapping uproariously, right? And the idea was it was just a patently good thing that whites were being replaced, and it infuriated me. And then on my college courses, this was when woke was really first starting to take off on college campuses. You started seeing just obviously retarded takes that men and women were the same in their temperament, and their everything was just socially constructed. Any difference, it was sort of through realizing that was so dumb that I sort of got exposed to race and IQ. I remember I got really into Ryan Falk on YouTube, Alternative Hypothesis. I don't know if you're familiar with his work. Yeah, I mean, he put on he was really the guy who red pilled me back in 2011. He did a bunch of debates with a bunch of environmental determinists, kind of making the case for hereditarianism. So it just once you've accepted that, it's really easy to become incredibly resentful of affirmative action and other sort of measures that just sort of assume a sort of tabula rasa, blank slate view of the mind. Meanwhile, you had like the Trayvon Martin thing. Obama was sort of like intervening in national corporate or in local court proceedings by saying like Obama could have been my kid, or Trayvon could have been my kid. You had just a lot of stuff. You had Dylan Roof shooting up that church in South Carolina, and then the Confederate flag was burned. This was like a few weeks away from gay marriage being like federally imposed on the nation. There was just a lot of stuff to make a young guy, if you were like say 22, 23 years old, like you would feel like you were being relentlessly attacked by people who hate you, by people who didn't just want to defeat you, because that's one thing, but they want to humiliate you and they want to make you suffer and they want to make you feel ashamed for being, your skin color, your gender, whatever. And after a certain point, you just say, they keep calling you a bigoted white guy. It's like, yeah, I guess I am. Fuck you. Right. And you eventually you start going into that direction. And it starts off in a very sort of sardonic, like humorous kind of way with the oven memes. And, I think it really germinated the alt-right on the rightstuff.biz. This was a libertarian blog coming out of 4chan, the 4chan poll. And also like sort of YouTube, the YouTube comment section of like Ryan Fox videos, a lot of different, platforms like that. And it was run by a guy named Mike Enoch. He had a friend, Jesse Dunstan, her seventh son. They were the sort of core. You had like Alex McNabb, you had a guy by the name of Google. You got a lot of other like kind of recurring characters, but those two were the main ones. And the right stuff was, I think, sort of the oven in which it's funny. It's the oven in which the alt-right cake was sort of baked, right? But like you'd obviously had like plenty of blogs and plenty of sort of like race and IQ stuff, JQ stuff. Like you had a lot of stuff going back a long time. Richard Spencer had been writing they're like Tacky Mag. There were all these different things, but those sort of predated me, and those are more like early, like geriatric millennial and Gen X alt writers. They like talking about that stuff. But like to me, I was always kind of aware of that. Like I would read Tacky Mag, I would watch Ramsey Paul videos, and I'd be sort of tangentially aware of that stuff. But it was it was really in 2014 that it started really cooking off. And then in 2015, then when Trump announced, that just like set everything into the stratosphere, because you had a big tent movement of all these different impulses, because you had like the sort of like libertarians who had become sort of white nationalist adjacent. They were into like Pinochet memes. They weren't willing to go as edgy as supporting Hitler, but they'd want to like drop people out of helicopters for like being socialists, right? That was a big sort of impulse. So you had them, you had the Gamergate people, you had the Manosphere, and then all of these elements kind of congealed into what became the alt-right. It really happened in like early 2015, mid 2015 on the Daily Show, which was, TRS's main podcast. And then also they came up with the show Fascination. It was more of a newscast. And, that kind of became a central hub of the alt-right, where we all got our news, where we all got the latest hot takes on things. We were sort of introduced to this cast of characters, and not just the TRS guys, but also Richard Spencer, who of course became more or less the leader. I'll just say the leader of the movement. I mean, I think Spencer was the only one who could have led the movement, right? Because everyone else was kind of just weird or autistic or just not, I don't know, not like he was the only one who was really aristocratic and had that sort of charisma. He was good looking. He was, presumably came from a wealthy family, very well educated. He did have some sort of like philosophical depth to him, so he could like, and I think he could kind of like lend a good. I don't know, like an era of civility. Because the thing is what people don't understand about the alt-right was that all of us were like educated guys, right? I mean, like we were like educated and intelligent and good looking and like not like dumb chuds who like walk around with tiki torch. I mean, like that sort of the alt-right was so successful that it filled the movement with a lot of idiots, right? A lot of people who were sort of lowest common denominator, a lot of people who just couldn't naturally strategize and figure out how to like shift the Overton window in an intelligent way. But the early core of the alt-right, these were incredibly intelligent guys. Most of them came from liberal households, from liberal parents, right? I mean, Mike Enoch very famously, like his parents basically like repudiated him, because they were such upper middle class shitlips. Like I think they were like academics. I don't know. My point is like we were not temperamentally conservative people. We were incredibly high openness, probably high disagreeableness, high neuroticism, fairly low conscientiousness. Like we were the sort of people who like to throw a grenade, into a crowd. Like we were sort of contrarian, sort of, but also just very honest. And I think like we weren't like really like viciously racist on a visceral level, more so than an average Republican. We were just more formalist about it. We were more honest about our racial sentiment, and we were pressing the boomer conservatives who would talk about like good schools or good neighborhoods. We were pressing them to be more formalist in their racial sentiment. And I think that's what I was always proud about at the alt-right, is that, we never let anybody like dog whistle, right? And because of that, like we could find common cause with hoteps, with black nationalists, they would sort of respect us on a level they wouldn't other white people, because we would be real with them. So I guess that's a lot of kind of like background noise. I mean, I'll say there were a lot of like sort of internecine squabbles in the early years. Like there's the Jewish question, right? I mean, like so you have people like Jared Taylor who famously said they look white to me, and he was very much in favor of sort of letting in base Jews or like like Jews who were pro-white. And then you had people like Kevin McDonald, who were obviously very much anti-Jew, kind of viewing them as sort of intractably anti-white and sort of paranoid and sort of ethnically nepotist in their behavior. And then you have people like Richard Spencer, people like who would sort of like try to take a nuanced view and just like they ultimately did think whites and Jews were sort of separate. I remember I had a phone call with Richard Spencer, and he said he like felt sympathy for the base Jew, but like ultimately there was really nothing he could do. It was just we're sort of on different civilizational paths. But like you had all these like little squabbles. You had like stuff over women, obviously the same sort of stuff you dealt with on Twitter. But what I will say is like back then, like the alt-right was very protective of its women, and like in fact like a big thing is we were trying to drive off people like Roosh, right? It was like the sort of proto Andrew Tate. But the thing is, Roosh, he never had the currency among millennial men that Andrew Tate has among Zoomers, because we had other models to look up to. We didn't need Roosh, we had Richard Spencer, right? We had, I mean, even millennial woes, even Mike Enoch. I mean, like we had other sort of these parasocial big brother role models that we could sort of inspire our behavior, teach us how to be men, teach us how to talk to women. I mean, I learned how to talk to girls from Richard Spencer's interview with that bug-eyed vice journalist. What was her name? El Reeve. Yeah, I mean, like like there's just so much like those guys. I still feel so much affection for them, and people like criticize Spencer, whatever. Like, look, he did as good a job as anybody could leading that movement. And after Trump won the election, it's like it was sort of we had gotten so popular, the movement was full of all these unagentic, retarded chuds from conservative backgrounds that they didn't have the ability to organize. I mean, in the early days of the alt-right, we had this sort of like autonomous instinct to sort of and I spread this idea in a lot of my videos. There was the idea of don't punch right, no enemies to the right. So you platform someone who's 1 degree to the right of you, right? And you also will talk to people who are 1 degree to the left of you, and like but you won't like punch at someone who's 2 degrees to the right of you or try to like deplatform them or cancel them. Instead, you just pretend they don't exist, but like just ignore them, right? So someone like Lawrence Southern can platform someone like Gavin McInnes. He platforms, Jared Taylor. He platforms Richard Spencer. He platforms like Kevin McDonald or David Duke. I mean, like everybody in the chain kind of benefits from this sort of like chain of edginess. And I think that's something that we sort of lost going into the dissident right. And I think that we've just started to get that back. And I think I've sort of played a role in that. And so did Richard Hanania. I think Hanania came back and he sort of like, there only needed like one final link in the chain, and I think I've sort of reestablished myself as that link in the chain, because I'll talk to white nationalists even though I'm no longer a white nationalist. I'll talk to white nationalists here on Substack. I'll also talk to people well to the left of me, and I think that like because of that, we now have a completely continuous Overton window, and we're sort of in the same space metapolitically that we were in 2015, where you just have this room for open discourse that I think is like very generative and good. Anyway, I've been mansplaining to you for like 20 minutes now. I'm sorry. I have a lot to say about the topic, but does this sort of answer you were looking for?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good little genealogy for the uninitiated. I was vaguely aware of this stuff. I wasn't as plugged in. I probably would consider myself alt light at that point. Very much listening to Molyneux and stuff like that. That was
Molyneux was
yeah.
pretty. Molyneux was
Was it, I
pretty.
guess yeah, in some ways, yeah. I mean, I came for the libertarianism and I stayed for like the complete schizo everything else. And I was like, well, this guy's right on the economy. He must be right about some stuff. I mean, yeah, I guess he's right in a lot of stuff. Yeah, I mean, it's at least in the case of the dissident right. What I've noticed is, people take this no enemies to the right thing as a kind of a I don't know, a push to mark themselves as the rightmost point. And
Yeah, but,
then,
but like nobody can be the rightmost. The rightmost is just like a serial killer who goes around killing minorities. I mean, that's dumb to just be right for the sake of it, right? Like these guys are just stupid edgelords, dumb incels. I mean, well, the problem is, okay, look, I don't think we can blame them too much, because the problem is it's my fault. It's my fault that the dissident right's like this. It's the fault of millennial men. We weren't good big brothers. We weren't good big brothers of the Zoomers. We after Charlottesville, we disappeared into the shadows. We disappeared. I mean, I just went into obscurity for 8 years, you know, and we let Nick Fuentes, who was 19 years old at the time, right? He took up the mantle of the Zoomers. He went to war with Charlie Kirk the next year, and he did a pretty good job up there, all it's worth. But I mean, he's 19 years old. What kind of leadership can he provide to a bunch of 15-year-olds? And we're seeing the consequences of that today, and that's why you're dealing with all this shit on Twitter.
Yeah. So is this your feeling that the lack of leadership led to whatever's going on right now?
Of course, yeah. I mean, it's obvious because, I mean, look, like when you had Richard Spencer around, again, criticize him all you want, but he sort of like modeled his standard of behavior that guys would like we all got that stupid undercut haircut back in 2017, right? With the short on the sides and long on the, and it looked retarded on my head. Like I didn't have the facial structure for it, but we all wanted to be Richard Spencer, and that's sort of like there's a lot worse you can be than Richard Spencer, right? I mean, you could be Andrew Tate, and that's what's happening with all these Zoomer guys. They want to be Andrew Tate, and I think that like millennial guys, like you couldn't have expected Richard Spencer to keep up that level of leadership. I mean, he was like, look, when you're getting mobbed, and he did it. I mean, he did an admirable job for as long as he did. But I mean, eventually you just get mobbed by Roberta Kaplan, that disgusting ogre. Like there's nothing you can do. I mean, him and the TRS crew and all these people, they didn't have the resources to lead to the level that they had, and it should have been me. It should have been guys my age who stepped up to fill that void. But instead, we were just like, fuck that. I'm going to go have a normie bug job and go like work as an accountant for 10 years or whatever. And then meanwhile, Fuentes is the only person who's showing any balls and doing anything, but he's a kid. And so if you start talking about cookies and, ovens and, doing all that stuff, because he's just not mature enough to really like think about like, what is the situation? But like, he's charismatic, he's talented, and I think he's more sort of grounded these days, but I think he's sort of gone down a path that he started when he was very young. And it's kind of hard to like course correct, right?
Yeah. And I think, this isn't really politics, this is entertainment. And then you kind of want it to turn into some more politics. So you have these followers, but the followers not necessarily a voter or even like, infantry member or whatever. They don't have the same level of commitment. And the interface that you have with them is the stream or whatever, TV show that you're putting on, Cozy TV or, whoever you are. It's not necessarily a traditional relationship between leader and client class or leader and follower. So I think the stream itself, like the medium itself, sets certain parameters of how you interact with these people and also how they interact with you and how their expectations affect you. And I think, it's almost inevitable that Nick Fuentes' political view is influenced by the dynamics that he has to deal with his, legion of 15-year-olds and what they want to hear and kind of where they want to push direction. And I know that at 15, even with my hormone profile, I did not have the best instincts for pro-civilizational politics.
But you know what? Like, again, I'm going to go back to being the Richard Spencer Defense Force. Like
Sure.
whenever millennial guys would start doing something stupid, he told us like we're being a bunch of pussies and like to shut up. I mean, like he was so disagreeable. He would just like, he couldn't really get pressured in that. I mean, like maybe over the long term, he made certain tactical decisions like marches and stuff that but like there was everyone sort of supported that at the time, even the people who were more, I mean, Ryan Falk didn't, he had the foresight, but like I supported it and it was dumb of me. But like I watched some of my old Disney parodies from that era, like the very last one I did, which was the Frozen song. The first time in forever, it was a inauguration day. Like I listened to those lyrics and it's a little bone chilling. I was really supporting some pretty not violent stuff, but like there's a lyric I had like disenfranchise all the pops or whatever. There was an extent to which I supported things that were way more radical than I do now. And it's kind of like when you're 23 years old and you feel like you just won, you have momentum and like the enemy is finally like falling back, you're not going to be the one who's like, okay, let's be reasonable. You're going to be like, okay, let's go like break their fucking nose, right? Like you're going to want to charge forward. And we all supported like Base Stick Man and all the fucking, Adam D'Amigo punching that lesbian. You remember that shit, right?
Based Stick Man, I completely forgot about it.
It's easy to forget all that, like because we were like there were like good heartwarming moments for a lot of that year, right? It felt like, oh, we're taking up the streets and beating up Antifa like it's 1930s Germany, but then it's like then Charlottesville happens and it just like wipes out everything, and it's like I still look at that and I'm like, okay, like what was he supposed to do? Those people wanted to kill him. I mean, it's like, but again, I mean, you can't really even. I don't know. Like it's a shame that we even went in that direction because again, and like I don't criticize Spencer or Kessler or any of the leadership because it's like if they hadn't done that, if they hadn't organized it, there would have been a spontaneous movement from the millennial guys to go do that themselves, and they would have elected one of their own. You probably would have done it worse, right? You probably needed some Gen X nihilism to sort of abate. I don't know.
It's interesting to me. I mean, how organized was this? Because, you keep referring to the leadership. I mean, it had to be a little bit decentralized. You kind of had these figureheads. This was still on the internet in the sense that, okay, people looked up to Richard Spencer because they were watching his content, not because, they were getting directives in the mail every day. Is that correct for me to assume?
Yeah, I would say early on in the movement, it was authentically incredibly polycentric, and it was almost like in the early days, it was almost like Mike Enoch was kind of the informal leader because he was just sort of curating the best content. And then Richard Spencer kind of he was the most charismatic and like intelligent, like sort of like presentable sort of guy. He was the only one who wasn't like kind of like weird. I mean, he's still weird in his own way, but he's like definitely like, presentable to normies, right? In a way that like I'm not, in a way that like Mike Enoch's. And again, nothing against Mike Enoch, but just, so because of that, Spencer could like talk to a wider swath of the population, and he could mobilize people. He could reach people who I guess like, well, it's weird because on one hand Spencer was himself very esoteric, and it was almost guys like me, like the meme makers, who sort of talk to like almost like dumber people, like the 4chan people, like sort of because I would take a lot of Spencer's big brained ideas and I'd sort of like disseminate them into certain points, and I'd like, like the friend enemy distinction or whatever, or like the Heinel line, or like all these ideas, right? Like they sort of like cross-pollinated throughout popular culture because of the meme videos and stuff. So like it's sort of weird because he was kind of more esoteric himself, but then he also did just have that like public speaking ability, the ability to mobilize like a big crowd of young guys who wanted to follow him into battle. And because of that, like I think everything just naturally leads in that direction, right? When you, especially like after, like another thing was like after Trump won, it was like, what do we do? Right? It's like everything is like so overdetermined by like whether like Bannon or Kushner talked to him last. Right? It's like, it was almost like, what's the point of doing anything? Like we should have become the dissident right at that point and just like split off. Because what's the alt right versus the dissident right? The alt right is unified. It's a collective. It's like a fist, right? It's like a common cause. It's a big tent, and we all are sort of subordinating our little special snowflake issues to the main thing. The dissident right is very fractious. It's like everyone is off, creating their own status hierarchy, creating their own little bubble, where they're sort of insulated. They're having the same conversations over and over, and that's what I'm trying to sort of, I came back because I'm just like, oh my god, like we need some like generativity. Now I see Hanani and what he's done, and I think what you've done too. Like there's a lot of people who are interested in curating different views and like sort of bringing new sort of discussions to the forefront. And I think we're entering into, like, I think we were in a long march with like Mao going into like Xinjiang or whatever for several years, but now we're sort of like confident again. We can sort of like, and I don't think we should attach ourselves to like the Trump movement or whatever. Like maybe Project 2025 has legs. I don't know. I'm not, optimistic. I'd rather just build a sort of cultural and intellectual scene that's so vibrant that we can sort of produce the ideas that could animate us 4 years from now. So like right now is kind of analogous to maybe 2012. We're sort of like building out the tacky mags and the altright.coms and all that.
So from the old art, right? Is there anything that you think we should keep? What should we discard? What should kind of the scene look like?
I would keep everything. Like if I could just like, I'm a boomer I'm like a Woodstock boomer, right? I think of the alt-right as my Woodstock. So I would keep every little aspect of it because I think, okay, well, what I'll say is this. I dropped out of the scene the moment it wasn't fun anymore. And so like I sort of had the experience of being an East left, like right when the alt-right was fun. And then the moment it became scary and bad, I was like nobody. So I just think of the movement as like 2015 to early 2017 when it was all fun. And I think that colors my view in a way that like other people, like Richard Spencer still has some nostalgia because, he was kind of the central figure. So I think it's easier for him. But I mean, a lot of the other leadership people, they want nothing to do with the alt-right, right? They just want to like fucking move away from that as fast as they can, which is understandable. But for me, like I definitely have like a ton of nostalgia, and I think that like the sort of lightheartedness is really good. I think we need to be more serious in a sense, but serious not in the sense of not making jokes, but in the sense of just like taking our ideas seriously. And then again, I mean, I don't know, maybe Fuentes has been successful because of the sort of like humor, irony, poisoning. It sort of is a defense against boomer intransigence, because boomers will sometimes like how like in Mein Kampf, Hitler talks about how like you'll win an argument and the next day they pretend like they, you never had the conversation. Boomers are like that. Like I'll like talk to my dad about like race and IQ, and I'll like, I'll convince him, and then the next day he'll just forget everything. So it's like with boomers, you can't even like rely on argumentation, and the Zoomers will just manipulate them. But a Zoomer can very authentically be a sort of like Civnat in the streets and a white nationalist in the sheets, and it's just like there's no contradiction. And I'm almost like sort of like admiring that approach. Like maybe you just kind of need to like be able to have contradictory ideas in your head at once, because we're entering into a more contradictory world, right?
Yeah, no, I mean that sounds, I think that's also maybe a function of the fact that the Zoomer feels like he's further away from power. So you can, embrace any sort of contradiction. You can play with any sort of ideology if it has no relation to reality, And I think that's part of it because, I see this myself as like an internet content producer. It's very easy to immerse yourselves in this stuff and then you pop back out, and it's quite consequence free if you don't get to Charlottesville's level of, of issues with it, if you don't commit to that level. And I think kind of maybe,
I mean, back in the day, like I think you would have gotten canceled in your life for even what you do right now. Like even platforming me, even though
yeah, for sure.
But like people underestimate how much better things are than like 2010. It's honestly amazing, and we should pat ourselves on the fucking back more. Like honestly, like, and that's why I wrote this whole article, Why the Alt-Right Won, because honestly, like yeah, we did. Like I can go on dates with like liberal women and talk to them about race and IQ, and they'll be like, yeah, that's valid. it's like, look, I mean, and I'm in Florida, so maybe I'm in a more, rarefied zone. But I mean, like, maybe you can't do that in Massachusetts, but still, like, I can talk to this stuff about like with coworkers or family. It's just like not as spicy as it was. People for like if you talked about race and IQ with like a normal person like 2011, they would think you're like Hitler,
Yeah,
right?
they
I
would
mean,
have
it's
a
just completely
stroke.
different.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely true. And I think, there are certain ways, especially like, sex differences, race and IQ, that's definitely mainstream. I mean, mainstream, maybe not like easily sayable politically, but it's in the water, the fact that, Elon Musk talks about it.
Everyone
Even,
knows. It's impolite
yeah,
to be
everyone kind of knows.
explicit, and
Yeah.
then that's kind of something I've been kind of moving in is the idea of like how much is said versus unsaid, right? And like subtext is it plays into the gender thing too because women communicate in a much more subtextual way, right? Um,
Hmm.
and I think, man, I think it's like the curse of autism. Like autistic guys just don't know how to engage with feminine subtext, and it just seems like terrifying to them because it'll seem like women are just lying all the time. When it's like no, just like she's like saying one thing with her body and saying another thing with her words, and you just have to like learn pattern recognition. It's not that bad.
Yeah,
But
I
a lot
mean,
of times.
I think it's just like the, game theory of the less physically powerful, to communicate, to have deniability, can be completely, focused in on what the other person's trying to convey with body language and stuff. It's just, you
Mhm.
live in a state of more heightened awareness, state of heightened fear. So, you have to measure everything a little bit more closely. So instead of just blurting stuff out, you kind of test the waters. You say something that could be interpreted two ways, and if he responds, then you say, no, 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 it's actually I didn't mean that. And yeah, I mean, it's just it makes
Which is
sense.
why we
Way.
say women don't have agency, right? Is because the idea that their cognition is more sort of sublimated into this, like I almost get the impression it's like I think in a sense women have more power than men because they sort of define the parameters of what you're allowed to talk about by sort of ascribing status or prestige to certain ideas and making other ideas kind of odious, like an incel coded, right? And then, but on the other hand, men sort of will formally give women a sort of social script that they internalize, and then I sort of become a right wing Dworkinite. I'm getting really into Andrea Dworkin. I think she was
Oh
right about.
yeah, me too. I've been reading right wing women. I'm gonna do book club with Helen Roy at one point, so we'll see.
It's yeah. I mean, she was right about like the left wants women to be public property, the right wing wants women to be private property. But the thing is, like, private property is like good, right? I mean, like I make sure no birds shit on my car. And maybe women don't want to be compared to that, but I mean, I don't know. It's like if something like you identify with yourself, and that's sort of I think that's kind of a black pill for women when they realize that like men are very expendable, but women are sort of replaceable in the sense that sorry, we don't have to get into like really dark red pill shit if you don't want to, but like I guess my idea is just that like men tend to value women for how they make us feel about ourselves, right? Whereas whereas for women it's like when they realize that they get kind of black pill because they're just like, oh, like I'm thinking about this guy and he's thinking about like how I make him feel or whatever, which isn't always the case, but it's kind of like broadly true. So I mean I could see how that would be sort of like suicide fuel for a lot of girls who, and I think like
Yeah,
women sort of paper over a lot of unfortunate like power structures about the world by sort of like repeating platitudes like, oh, there's someone for everyone, and like like I think women hate incels because incels kind of like put those like stinky, it's like they're taking a big stinky like dead fish and like shoving it around everyone's face, like look at this, it's like yeah, we know, we don't have to talk about it, right? I mean, it makes it worse.
yeah. No, I think in a way, the fact that everyone's just like taking these like, terrible black pill truths and, making content out of them and just not only just making rage bait of the worst caliber, just, plastering the internet over it. And not only that, okay, you hear about this once, but then people sign up to pages who that do only this. They just push out this stuff every day, and it's like you're signing up to swim in the worst factoids about, which, could be true, but they could be like marginal to the overall experience of dealing with the opposite sex. They're obviously based on anecdotes, they're obviously based, but the fact that you take this true stuff, but you just rub it, you just like wallow in it, like in the trench of, the worst
Mhm.
dirt that evolutionary psychology can unearth, and mostly, distorted facts from evolutionary psychology. And yeah, I think this is, it's suicide fuel because of the dosage, not necessarily because, they're not true or anything, but you have to
I
take
feel like
this, you
it's
know
always true to some extent, right? But it's like they if you like internalize these heuristics on such a deep level, you'll seek out people who like embody them in like a very like grotesque and trashy way beyond. And like, it's like the sort of goal of dating, or, like any venture in life, is kind of creating a little self-selected bubble for yourself where all those unfortunate red pills no longer apply, because like you just create an incentive structure that ensures good behavior for people around you. I mean, that's, like most guys, by the time you're 30, you can just like not think about these things, and it's like not a big deal, right? Right? I mean, it's like you're fine. Like you won't have women who are like acting in that way anymore, because you're just like high status enough that it's like you're insulated, right? But it's like if you're not continuously improving yourself, you won't see that big picture. And the big problem here is that like guys, like everyone's parents are too old, right? It's like your dad is like your grandpa these days, so like you're not on the same page. And like even like discounting the fact that technological progress has like made society change so much faster, even discounting that, I mean, by the time a guy is like 50 years old, he's not thinking about getting laid or getting away. I mean, he's thinking about like his 401k or whatever. Like he can't give his son any good advice about like my dad said that I should find a wife by like loitering at a university and hitting on undergrads. Right? It was just a few years ago. This is what boomer men tell their millennial sons, and that's why millennial men go to that's why we needed the red pill. We needed it because they're like heuristics were terrible, and you needed those Gen X guys who were closer to us in age who could sort of mentor us in that way. But the problem is so many of them were like bitter divorcees. Like they were so focused on getting pussy, or like getting like a third world wife or whatever, who would just be hyper submissive ostensibly, which isn't even true. Like they were so focused on that they don't really know how to have a like a meaningful relationship with a woman. And I find that like it's after a certain point, it's like once you learn how to get laid, it's easy. Like you can do it a million times, but then it's like, wait, how do I actually fall in love? Because it's like you'll fall in love with your first girlfriend, and then she breaks your heart, and then like you'll sleep with a bunch of women because you're just like very misogynistic, and then you'll realize it's not doing anything for you, and then you're like, what the fuck? Like what? Like how do I like not just hate life? Right. And then it's like, yeah, I mean, like none of those fucking red pillars like had any solution for like how to actually fall in love in a way that won't get you hurt. So they just were sort of, you're like dead in yourself in a sense.
Yeah, but it's like the exclusion of personal sacrifice and also like the inherent tragedy of life. That's all of everyone selling this. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
if there is this, dark miasma that's like sucking the life out of you, and as long as you know who it is that's doing it to you, you can avoid suffering in life. Well, yes, of course. The only way to opt out of all of this is absolutely not engage in this, or
You gotta
until,
blame at least the shootout. You gotta go
yeah,
below.
or blame whoever. But yeah, I don't know. At least you were mentioning before that, okay, you stopped when it wasn't fun anymore. I mean, essentially that's kind of what I'm pointing out. It's like I'm sure this is not the experience that everyone has online, but for someone of my genetic configuration, it really isn't fun
Right.
anymore. I really don't want to. It's also probably because I have two small children. I got a life, and it's much more fun to spend time with them. Much more exhausting as well. But yeah, there's a whole other universe. And when I come back and here, it just feels like I'm putting on my gutter suit, and now I'm coming into splash and the shit with everyone, and it's like. I feel like it really used to be much more generative and interesting. Even the stuff that was really blackpilling was kind of sophisticated, but now it's really just like, yeah, there's like the
Well, there were
merchants.
always fights and people being mean to each other. Okay, so here I have a nuanced take on this. So
Hmm.
I don't mean to keep interrupting you, mansplaining. So
Sure.
but I
It's a
think that maybe
podcast with men, so yeah, everyone expects it. Don't worry.
I'm really bad at it. So okay, so I've been thinking about this in light of that conflagration I had with Reagan Arms Gray over that. So that's actually with your last like podcast guest before me. That's very interesting that you chose
Fitting.
that. Well yes, she I was kind of being a little mean to her, but like I was doing it in the sense. Like obviously, I don't have any like personal resentment towards her. It's like I'm playing a character, right? Like when you're an e-celeb and you're engaging with other e-celebs, to generate engagement, like you'll be a little exaggerated, and that's something. I mean, maybe she doesn't want to do that, but just it's fine. I respect that. But like to me, it's just a money making exercise. Like I made like $500 on my first article, just like like it's like Hulk Hogan hitting Andre the Giant with a chair, right? I mean, it's just like a professional wrestling shit. I mean, so that's my attitude towards it. It's just like a business thing. But I guess like most guys who grew up on 4chan, most guys who grew up in this sort of old internet, like it's a culture just like everyone calls each other a faggot or whatever. Like we're just like so aggressive, and I think a lot of women, like I sort of I wouldn't do that for you for some reason. I guess like some women who are like kind of goody two shoes, like you kind of just get the urge to like pull their pigtails a little. You know what I mean? So maybe some
Hmm.
guys are sort of feeling that way towards you, but like I mean I think the thing you have to understand is that like most of these guys are just like 15-year-old biracial incels, so like they literally don't matter, right? Most guys by the time they get their first girlfriend, they're like stop thinking this way, and like literally like most of them are just too young. Like Zoomer guys have this arrested development where they're just like not attractive to women until they're like 22, 23, and then they'll just get a girlfriend and it'll be fine. So I mean I don't think it's I think you just have to take it, just realize a lot of them are just Yeah, there's that. But I think that really the person you should blame, like I think women shouldn't blame the incels, and incels shouldn't blame the roasties. I think both of us need to blame older guys for a failure of leadership, for a failure to provide a greater sense of direction for these younger guys who are sort of lost, who don't have any, they think they don't have any tenable path to getting a woman, to getting a good job, to anything. And that's why like so much of my content now on Substack is all about. I mean, it's also because it makes money, because guys will just pay for advice on women or job or whatever. But I mean, like I also want to be a little pro-social with it, right? I'm thinking about the way you get these guys to, like, if you hate Andrew Tate, right? You're not going to like stop guys from watching Andrew Tate by saying he's a sex trafficker, by saying he's a misogynist, by saying any of this. You're going to stop it by giving these guys better strategies that are more effective at getting women and getting money, but are sort of more pro-social and are more dignified. Because most middle-class white guys do not want to live like that. They don't want to live like some repulsive like rapper, right? Pimp. I mean, that's not what we want. We want to be like Richard Spencer, right? I mean, that's the goal. So, I mean, to me, millennial men have to step up, and we have to mentor the Zoomers. And it shouldn't fall on you to have to like engage with these guys, like, because look, I love getting into fights with people. Like if I could just like yelling at people on the internet all day, I would. So it's like guys like me need to be fighting with these guys, so you don't have to. And I think women, there is a role for women in the movement as leaders, but it's a big part of it is sort of sanitizing like yucky ideas, and like a pretty woman can like talk to like an autistic guy and make his ideas seem like less insult coded or less like abhorrent or less like scary to normies. And I think all women who sort of participated in like intellectual salon environments, they're aware of this, and it sort of consciously shapes their behavior. And that's a sort of feminine style of leadership that women are really necessary for. I mean, ever since like revolutionary France, we've always had women kind of playing that role. I mean, in America, and like Abigail Adams. I mean, like it was sort of like papering over like ego tensions between like two autistic guys with like a 150 IQ and 99th percentile disagreeableness, who are just gonna like want to kill each other for something stupid when like they need to be collaborating. I mean, you need like Abigail Adams types to like paper that over. And so I value women tremendously for that, but I don't think that women should have to be like on the front lines getting in fights with people, because it's not suited for the female type. I mean, you have people like Ann Coulter, who it's like fine, but like you or Lauren Southern or like I don't know, like Brittany Pettibone, like these people should not be getting into like fights. Like it's not bad thing to expect women to have to do, but like you just need there to be fights between men in any movement, or else you get like you need to stir the pot, or the chili's gonna burn on the stick to the side of the pot and like congeal. So
Yeah, yeah. No, I think you're right about that. I think there's definitely two styles of communication. Yeah, I mean, in my case, I avoid beefs at all costs. I don't think I've ever beefed with anyone. It's just not my style. I see it drives engagement. I see people like to watch it, but the problem is, I have so much stuff to do in my real life. Like my children need me, that I just can't. I can't avoid taking it with me when I put my phone down, that to see how the beef has continued in my absence, and who's joined, and who's on my side and who's on their side. I've done it like once or twice. I remember I beefed with James Lindsay, of all people, at one point, and it was just exhausting.
is
And I was
this a
like,
Christian
no,
guy or something?
no, he was actually like a, I don't know, I would say IDW. He wrote that
Mention me the name.
cynical theories book. The SoCal affair, where they so-called
Oh, okay.
to,
Yeah.
fake social science papers. He's kind of like a, atheist type guy, but
He's one of the
also,
guys who thinks he's really edgy because he's like parroting some like big brain centrist.
yeah, he was like the big brain centrist at one point. And my point to him was that, he'll come around on the critique of liberalism. But yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know. We've parted ways.
Well, the
Yeah.
way you're supposed to do a beef is privately.
Mhm.
You discuss with the person, here's what we say about each other, and you figure out the insults you use. That's what I wanted to do with Reagan. I was telling her, look, we're gonna do like a Rosie O'Donnell
Kayfabe.
content, and she was like, I don't
Mhm.
want to be Rosie O'Donnell. I said, fine, you'd be like Megan Kelly. But like, I think me and Reagan are more like Kanye and Taylor Swift. So I think maybe we can emulate that. Hopefully she'll listen to this. I'm sure she will. Reagan, I obviously no real beef, but this is a way for both of us to get rich. So message me. We gotta do this. That'd be fun.
I can see that you are in a sort of a manic phase with their content production. Yeah,
Oh
I
yeah.
think this is, yeah. We've kind of found each other at different points of this cycle, because I do also have manic phases. This is not one of my manic phases, also because of sleep deprivation. But
Mhm.
yeah, I'm in my depressive phase. But I will swing back up, because it always happens. Yeah, I think another thing I wanted to ask you about was kind of sexuality. I
Mhm.
mean, we've been talking about this a little bit, but you have this kind of discovery. It's not a theory. This is, based on actual data that sexual or menarche, the first period for girls, is increasingly earlier, and I think that's pretty much observable in just the generations of my mothers and my grandmas, probably related to nutrition. Who knows? Maybe
Oh no,
estrogen in
there's
the
a lot of
water.
things. There's a paper. I'll send you the link and you can put it in the comment section. One of my
Hmm.
female collaborators, Sai, she wrote it. She's an Indian immigrant. She's like a college student right now. She's really brilliant. So she wrote this like big elaborate article showing all the different endocrine disruptors and all the other causes. I mean, it's really honestly terrifying because it's the average girl would like not just get her first period, but like develop breast tissue, in the Middle Ages around like 15, 16 years old. Right. Now this was a
Hmm.
time when kids were growing up a lot faster, right? That's probably equivalent to like a 22-year-old today. Now imagine most girls if they didn't get boobs until they were like 22. Like a lot of the sort of like traumas they have around male sexuality like probably just wouldn't exist, right? Whereas like these days, you get girls who they basically have the mind of like a 6-year-old, right? They'll be like 11, but they're so arrested
Hmm.
development, they're so childish, like so consumed by anxiety, and they're getting breast tissue at really like a completely childlike state of mind, and then they're going off to like a pool party or sleepover, and then they're getting like these bad experiences with their friend's dad or older brother, or and I've talked to so many girls who I've dated over the years who've like had an experience like this, and it's like this didn't happen 100 years ago, right? Because girls were still like they would be like mentally, people just don't realize this, girls would be like mentally mature at the level of like a 15, 16-year-old, but like they look like a child, and because of that they would have a few years to develop that kind of like comfort, I don't know, of like dealing with people in the world before they had to like deal with
Yeah.
these situations.
I think that there's something to that. I do, it depends where. I think like in the upper crust of Western Europe, probably they wouldn't have had these experiences. But I was looking at, I think like some study out of Mexico, and just the incidence of like pedophilia and incest in Mexican families. And this, obviously it's a representative sample. I'll have to dig up that study, but it was,
Because they live
I
with
don't know,
like
something
grown-ups,
around 40%. Yeah, because they live close, and living in close quarters with family is not like a historical, exception. That was kind of the norm. And maybe Mexico is extra spicy. But yeah, there, I think, having, especially, teenage cousins is spicy to live with if you have like young little girls or even little boys. I mean, you don't want, kind of uncivilized puberty level boys in your home that are not directly related to your
yeah, like who
children.
the hell would like let their 11-year-old daughter like be around
People
like
don't have a choice. That's how they live.
yeah, I
So
guess.
yeah.
Oh God.
Yeah, but also uncles and fathers and all this, all the classics as well. But yeah,
Right.
it's a tough one. And I mean, I don't, I've been reading about like the 14th century. I don't know, it's called A Distant Mirror. It's a really interesting book about the plague, extreme religious wars, all sorts of revolts, and the attitudes and care for children and women were pretty much non-existent at that point. It was just, yeah, they're barely mentioned in any sort of historical record. It was just kind of incidental that you had, your wife, your children, very very little care. And this is mostly about like Western Europe, France, and
I mean,
places
I
we
assume
see
if
as
they're white people,
civilized.
they're taking good care of their women. I mean, white we love our women, right?
Yeah, I
I
mean,
think
I think comparatively to the global standard, they were taking better care of them than probably anywhere else in the world. But yeah, it was a tough. Like the distant history is
see,
is a
like
pretty.
I feel like when women sometimes talk about like women being oppressed historically, it's like they don't realize that like men were like, yeah, like as a woman,
Oh, of course, of course.
if it, like,
No, but the people writing the books, the few historians, like
right.
half of them were wiped out by the plague. Another quarter was eaten up by religious wars. The other died of tooth infection. Everyone was taking a hit in these
Well,
times.
I feel like
But like I say,
when men imagine what it's like to be a woman, they imagine the 50th percentile woman. Whereas when women imagine what it's like to be a man, they imagine like the 95th percentile man, right?
yeah, yeah, I think so. Yeah, there's definitely a failure of imagination there, and I think a lot of men imagine the experience of women also. It's like a failure in cross-sex mind reading. Like the idea if you're going down the streets and everyone wants to have sex with you. It's different if you're in a male body. If you're in a male body and you're walking down the street and everyone wants to have sex with you, it's quite a wonderful experience.
Hello,
If you're
lady.
a woman, especially like I guess, a more petite or, defenseless type of woman is absolutely terrifying. This is a horrible situation, but also, there's a certain power in it. How are you going to harness that power because you need it? It's socially, it will get you to a social level if you know how to calibrate how you present yourself. So that's also why a lot of beautiful women walk down the street with like resting bitch face, because that's the only way they know how to calibrate that word. Like, okay, don't touch me, I'm beautiful, but also notice me, but don't. It's like it's a strange thing. It's like, having the fire hose of attention, which can also like smack you in the face if you don't know exactly what you're doing. It's like being in a state of constant vigilance. Yeah, I think every, both sexes have their respective crosses to bear, and I think it's just hard for the opposite sex just because of our, inherent brain
We value different
morphology to
things. Everything's
imagine. Yeah,
scarce. Yeah.
exactly.
Do
Yeah,
you think
exactly.
women, okay, big brain take, hot take. Do you think that any job an attractive woman does is technically sex work?
I mean, there is a component of sex work even in the jobs that attractive men do. I think
Yeah.
probably more so for women. Depends what their circumstances. If they're obviously report like if you're in finance and you're very attractive and you're like on a client side, and there's a bigger sex work component there because you're taking out Japanese clients to show take them on the town, and your part of your prestige is how you look. But in the same way, a good looking guy in the firm also kind of has that. For women, it's always a little bit in the background. But it's not as straightforwardly beneficial as one might think. There's more things to navigate because the idea of like sleeping your way to the top is not that direct. It's not like, oh, okay, I'm starting at the janitor. I'm just gonna have sex with him, and he's gonna give me this, and then this other guy's gonna give me this. There are certain circumstances in which this is advantageous, but
Yeah. Kamala
the
Harris.
exchange rate for give me a job, I have sex with you is not very direct. Like how men repay a sexual favor is not it's not clear. If you're in any sort of tension with his position, he doesn't
Yeah.
want to ruin his reputation. Is he the kind of person who's going to promote someone? Are you going to have issues with the other women working there? Are you the only woman in there? You have intersexual tensions with them. They don't want to see you like plopping your boobs on the table for whatever. They're going to conspire against you. That's a whole thing that you have to be in tension with. So a lot of times women who work in like high flying positions will have like extra modest clothing to maintain the intersexual tensions that they have with the other women in that, because everyone's vying for the same high prizes. You kind of have to keep the peace.
Well,
It's
women in
really,
like finance or consulting or anything, in my experience, they're either very Taylor Swift, like sexless, or like super innocent, like Reagan types. I know she was a finance bro, or they'll be like super aggressive and boisterous. They'll act like Donald Trump, but as like a woman, and like you don't really get anything in the middle. It's like they're all playing a character,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. Because the thing is, the ones that are boisterous are kind of trying to be one of the boys,
Yeah,
which is essentially you're cutting yourself off from the women there, because
yeah.
that's you don't want to be that in a group of women. I know, because that's kind of the role that I've played for a long time. But if you kind of play the Reagan role, where you're just kind of chill and demure and unproblematic, then you can play the woman game. You pretty much have to choose, or you could kind of change, but then you're a bit two faced, and
You have to be the
you're
reasonable
playing everyone.
deviate, right? And then yeah,
Yeah,
not a threat.
it makes sense that one would have to act this way. Men act differently in groups of women, but we all kind of adapt to make things work. But it's quite tricky. It's not as
I feel
straightforward
like
as
I feel like I have great social skills with any person one on one, but the moment there's like more than two people, I become like mentally retarded. Like I become like a non-functional, like
who do I have to
oh,
be? Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I think if you're a little bit autistic, you learn how to play things a certain way.
yeah.
And then you kind of have to play your script, or, going off script, and being a little bit more nuanced with it. That's when it gets a
Yeah, you
bit
become like
crazy.
scientific about it. Like you develop these very scientific heuristics about human behavior, and I think that can, it can be really painful for you in your mid 20s, especially because you've sort of you've accumulated enough experience. You know what works for you in a certain bubble, but then you still your bubble isn't big enough that you can just like push out everybody else. So you'll still occasionally encounter people whose like life experiences are very different from your own and who have very different heuristics. And when you encounter someone like that, it can be like horrifying, just because like you're approaching the world in a totally different way.
Mhm. Yeah, going back to the thing that you said, about sexuality being kind of almost uniquely traumatic for girls now. I was
Yeah.
thinking I think in a way it's probably uniquely traumatic, or not, maybe not traumatic, but unique for men as well, growing up in kind of this like
Oh my
environment
God.
where there's no life scripts. You're
Oh my God.
super
You,
saturated with sexual stimuli, the
it's like
girls dress.
everyone's molested. Every little boy is molested by porn, right? Like as
Yeah,
they're 8 years
yeah.
old, he's exposed to like hardcore porn that like he'll it's before he has a pubescent sex drive. He's gonna get addicted to the novelty and the transgression of it, and then he'll be like addicted. He'll want to like Facebook his girlfriend when he's like 16, and then she'll like hate him for that, or like he won't be able to get hard, and then he'll have to like be taking blue chew when he's like 17 years old. I mean, that's pretty terrible, evil thing to do to a young boy. And then, when guys go out into the sexual marketplace and they start interacting with women, women will tell them, "Oh, we want you to be strong. We want you to be dominant." But then because Zoomer girls aren't agentic, because they don't vocalize. I mean, so many times when I was and this was probably less bad than it is today, because this is millennials. But when I was like 25 years old, I would like there were plenty of times I'd hook up with a girl and she'd like every indication she'd be fine in the moment, and then like she'd leave my place the next day, everything was fine. Then a week later she'd text me like, "Oh, I was really uncomfortable, but I didn't say anything because I had a fawning trauma response." And like the first few times this happened, I was just like, "Oh my God, you stupid, like it's not my problem." But then
Mhm.
eventually I realized actually it is my problem, because you have to adapt to the sort of cultural call. And that's why I find the Reagan attitude so frustrating, because it's like, look, like you can't just tell people to do better. You can't just exhort them to do better. You need to like figure out ways to change the sort of legal regime and the sort of material incentive structure, not just like the kind of cultural incentive structure that like, it's kind of questionable how much you can directly influence that in the first place. So like that's why I wanted to have like a law against like rakishness, which is like a man just sort of coercing a woman into instead of being kind of pushy or being, come on, baby, just a little bit, like something like that. And it wouldn't be like a criminal thing where you go to jail. Like she could like sue you for 2 grand, and most of the time she'd drop the charge, just send her some flowers or something. That's how it works. I mean, that's how it works with most people when this thing happens. But I'm just saying, like, I think that like I don't know, like you need to address the problem head on, and you
Yeah.
need to like sort of deal with like because these kids are just like retarded. They're so traumatized. They're so unagentic that they can't. Like a lot of these girls need to take a Xanax to order a pizza. How do you expect
Mhm.
them to like say no to a guy 3 times their size behind closed doors?
If you enjoyed this conversation up to this point, you will also enjoy the extended version of the conversation, which is over on Substack. That's at alexkashuta.com or on patreon.com/aksubversive. Patreon has just a podcast, and Substack has a community, the back catalog of all my writing, a lot more archival things, a few more exclusive episodes. So it's slightly more of an enhanced version of the show. I really appreciate any sort of contribution that listeners can make. I don't have ads. I mean, except for if you're watching this on YouTube, you probably saw a few YouTube ads. I'm trying to, monetize a little bit on YouTube, but in general, I don't have ads. If you want to listen to podcasts, there are no ads on it. So essentially, subscriptions is the only thing that works, and I really, really do appreciate if you could make a contribution. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode.